Tim Steidten actually walk away from West Ham United? He only started the job on the 1st of July, but there's been rumours over the last couple of days that he's getting frustrated at the lack of transfer activity at West Ham, perhaps a lack of control that he has over transfers because of David Moyes insisting on getting certain players in. And as a result, could he walk away? I struggle to believe it. I struggle to believe it for a couple of reasons. We'll get on to that. And also, I'm going to try and bust a couple of myths around West Ham transfers. Those myths are that if we sign someone with Premier League experience, it's a David Moyes signing. And the second one is that David Moyes will only play players with Premier League experience. We'll get on to that in just a second. But first, let's deal with the rumour. I seen it on Wednesday, and it was from WHUFC_news. They tweeted, "There's a chance Tim Steidten walks away from his role at West Ham due to the lack of agreement on the club's transfer activity." Now, I've got the whole quote from 90 Minute Football. Now, I quite like Twitter accounts like this. They do what we do. We just do it in video format. Myself and Gonzo, we have a look at what's been said in the mainstream media. We'll take it and we'll discuss it. We'll give our opinion. We'll report on what's been said elsewhere. We'll give our opinion and we'll read your opinions in the comments. And accounts like this do that on Twitter. They go around, they take it and they summarise it in a tweet. My favourite one at the minute is the AI Sean account, who just rips into the transfer rumours, takes the piss out of transfer rumours. I like it. I like a little bit of humour. Anyway, the quote from 90 Minute Football was on one of their podcasts. Bailey said that we do understand there's a chance Steidten walks away from this. There really is. He doesn't want to be responsible. We're hearing from sources at West Ham there's a chance he walks away. So there's sort of good news and bad news for me on this one. Bad news, it's a very unhealthy rumour. This helps nobody at all. Even if you don't believe it, like I don't believe it, I don't like that being out there. I don't like that rumour swirling around the club because it creates frustration. It riles fans up a little bit. The good news is it's come from 90 Minute Football. Now, I don't mean to be harsh, but I'd be more worried if this came from Steinberg, ex employee, Sean Weston, one of those who I consider to be the most reliable ones when it comes to in-the-know reporting at West Ham United. And I don't really class 90 Minute Football as that. Now, that's not to say I don't believe Bailey has been told something. It's just that I don't believe the person that's telling Bailey. Because in order to have this information, in order to confidently say to a journalist, I think Tim Steidten might walk away from West Ham, you're probably going to have to know Tim Steidten. You're going to have had a conversation with Tim Steidten about him quitting West Ham United. I just struggle to believe that 4 weeks into the job, he's ready to give up already. But even if we take the general consensus over the last week, and again, you might not fall into these categories, but when I read the comments, there's a general consensus that David Moyes wants Premier League proven players. That's what he wants. There's a general consensus that Tim Steidten wants to bring in young talent. So let's take Carlos Borges, and this is the perfect example because he doesn't have any Premier League experience. So there's a general consensus that that's not a David Moyes signing, it's a Tim Steidten one. Well, we can't have it both ways. We can't have that Steidten's got no control and then attribute this, our first major signing of the summer, to Tim Steidten. That is what is the general consensus. I'm not saying that's true. Express employees reported that it's actually a Rob Newman pick. Rob Newman was the one that told West Ham about Carlos Borges, and that the agent of Carlos Borges gets on really well with David Sullivan, and as a result, we are signing him. Now that's, I think, keeping it simple. There would have been conversations. I don't think Sullivan's just gone and bought him because an agent's told him to. Moyes might have been involved in this. Steidten might have been involved. Steidten might have walked up and said, yeah, I've heard really good things about this player. That's exactly the type of profile we want to bring in. But my point is, I don't think we can have it both ways. I don't think we can attribute this signing to Tim Steidten, which I think is what a lot of people are doing, because it fits the profile that we're looking for when we appointed Steidten, and then say, well, of course he's going to walk away. He's got no control. I just struggle to believe it. Now, maybe I'm going to give Tim a little bit too much of the benefit of the doubt here, but I would have fully expected serious conversations regarding control over transfers to have occurred before Steidten signed for West Ham United. His stock was high in football. We know for a fact, he had talks with Chelsea. Chelsea wanted him. He was linked to Liverpool and Spurs as well. Whether he had conversations with those clubs, I don't know. There's not been any confirmation from either party. But Steidten himself has confirmed he spoke with Chelsea about potentially going there, and as he's ended up at West Ham United. So for him to have a conversation with David Sullivan, I'd imagine assurances over how much control he's got over who comes to West Ham United would have been his number one priority. It must be. As a technical director / director of football, the one thing you want to know is how much control you have over transfers. The second thing you're going to want to know is what your budget is for the upcoming summer. Now, that can only go so far because it doesn't mean you know how much you've got for the following summer, etc., etc. You get my point. But I'd imagine the two things Steidten would have wanted to know was control and money. And as a result of that conversation with David Sullivan, he's joined West Ham United. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that Sullivan has stuck to what he's told Steidten, and it could have, maybe he's been told you've got 100% control, he's come in and realised he's not got any, and as a result he might walk away. I just struggle to believe this. Now, part of the reason I probably struggle to believe it is because we're going to take a look at the rumours now and what I think is two myths around West Ham transfers. But before I do that, this video is sponsored by the One Football app, and if you want to keep up to date with all the latest news, such as Steidten might walk away, Scott McTominay is apparently our #1 defensive midfield target, but he got injured in the final against Man United. We've had a bid rejected from Southampton for James Ward-Prowse. This is all covered on the One Football app. It's completely free to download, so get it on your phone, get it on your device right now. You can use the link in description so they know you come from Hammers Chat, or the QR code that's currently on your screen right now. Just point your camera at it, click it, and then it'll take you to the App Store where you can download it. It is free, and there's no tricks here. You don't download the app and then when you go into it, it says, hey, hello, now you're here, £5 per month, please. There's none of that. There's no sign up fees, nothing. You download it for free, you browse for free, nothing. You don't pay a thing. So please do get it downloaded. It's the best way to keep up to date with what's happening at your football club, as well as all the major competitions. Championship football, well, English Football League starts next weekend, next Friday. Southampton play Sheffield Wednesday. This season starts next a week. What's happened to the summer? It's gone like that. Anyway, One Football app, get it downloaded. Now, I feel there's a couple of myths around West Ham transfers at the minute. The first one I've spoken about before, which is that David Moyes will only play players with Premier League experience. Not the case. David Moyes is showing more than one occasion, many occasions, that he's happy to put a player into that starting 11 from the word go if he wants to. Look at our current 11. Who do we think would start against Bournemouth right now? Vladimir Soufal at right back went straight into the team. Aguerd, as soon as we signed him, as soon as he was fit, straight back into that starting 11. We've got Thomas Souček, as soon as we signed him, straight into the 11. Jared Bowen, straight in. Okay, the first 2 games he was on the bench. Third game, straight in, hasn't come out the starting 11 since then. Lucas Paqueta, straight in. Gianluca Scamacca, pretty much straight into the starting 11. Moyes is showing he will play players without Premier League experience, whether they come from the Championship, whether they come from abroad, it doesn't matter. If he wants to play them, he will. Granted, there are also players he's brought in that have no Premier League experience that's not worked out, like Alex Kral and Nikola Vlasic. I will admit, though, the ones that haven't worked out tend to not have Premier League experience. The ones that do have it tend to work out under David Moyes. There is that. But I feel it's a bit of a myth that if you ain't got any, you're not going to get a game under David Moyes. If we were to go and spend big money on a player, I would expect Moyes to play him regardless of what his CV looks like in terms of football. The second myth is that Tim Steidten won't. When we get linked to players with Premier League experience, they say, it almost gets attributed to David Moyes immediately. Obviously, Carlos Borges won't because he doesn't have Premier League experience. So, but even though we're buying it from a Premier League club, doesn't count because he's not played in Premier League enough. So it must be a Tim Steidten one. But when you look at Tim Steidten's record in Germany, for a Bundesliga club, they've brought in a lot of players from English clubs. A lot. Not loads, but I'm going to go through them. They've obviously just signed Granit Xhaka. Obviously, he's not there now, so you can't attribute that one to Steidten. But given that he left in March, it's possible. It's possible Xhaka was on the radar of Leverkusen. Steidten's boss is still there. The people under Steidten are still there. So it's possible that Xhaka might have been identified while Steidten was there. I can't prove it. So we'll get rid of Xhaka. However, Callum Hudson-Odoi from Chelsea. We've got Demarai Gray, who we're being linked with at the minute as an alternative to Borges. Now, I've always been confident Borges is going to happen. I still am confident Borges will be a West Ham player in the next few days. But there was a rumour during the week that Demarai Gray could be the alternative. Now, I sort of disregarded it because I thought to go from like a 14 million young, exciting player to what is almost like a proven penalty. It's different. It's completely different players. But anyway, Gray was touted round. And immediately it was sort of like, oh, typical David. Well, hang on a minute. Steidten signed Demarai Gray. Demarai Gray hasn't played under David Moyes, but he has played under Tim Steidten. Steidten brought him to Bayer Leverkusen. Timothy Fosu-Mensah. Now, the one thing I will say about this list is they're not necessarily Premier League proven. They've just been signed from English clubs. My point is Steidten shops in England. Just because a player is coming from an English club does not mean that Steidten is not involved. Then we take a look at his time at Bremen. Now, there's a lot of players. Some I've never heard of myself. Klaassen, obviously the big one from Everton. He was signed, quite expensive signing for Bremen, just 14 million, I think it was, they paid for him. And then there's players that we've not heard of, or you might have heard of him. Zhang, they got from West Brom. He didn't play for West Brom, but he signed on loan from West Brom. Serge Gnabry, of course, from Arsenal. De Santo, do you remember him? Franco De Santo from Wigan. He went to Werder Bremen when Steidten was employed by that club. Kevin De Bruyne, of course, and then they also had a player who I cannot pronounce. I cannot even read my own writing. He went on to play for Sunderland. They signed him from Chelsea, Dejaboldi or something like that. I don't know. You have to Google him. But my point is, Steidten brought him to Werder Bremen just on loan. Played half a season for Werder Bremen, went back to Chelsea, and then Sunderland signed him for 10 million. Sunderland signed him for 10 million based off what he did in the Bundesliga. So when it comes to Tim Steidten and when it comes to English players, English-based players, don't rule out that Steidten is the one that wants to bring him to West Ham. He's showing at Bremen and Leverkusen that he will shop in England. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean Premier League proven. Like the Palhinha link, it feels like a David Moyes thing. It does. But Palhinha was strongly linked to Leverkusen a couple of seasons ago when Steidten was the one in charge of transfers at that club. Palhinha was strongly linked with a move to Leverkusen. Maybe it's Steidten that wants to bring Palhinha to this club, because one thing, while Steidten will look to bring in younger players, he's not against spending big money. A lot of his signings were not cheap, Steidten's. You look at Schick for 20 odd million. He will spend tens of millions on players. He's not averse to spending it. Not every player has to cost a handful of million. But going back to the rumour, anyway, that was just two myths I wanted to talk about, because I just get not necessarily frustrated, but when I realise I'm coming across, I'm being very defensive of David Moyes here. Just let me reiterate, I wanted David Moyes gone after we won the Conference League final. I thought he should have went. I still think he should have went. Arguably, because of all this transfer stuff, I'm even more convinced David Moyes should have went after that Conference League final. But he's not gone. He's still here. So we have to move forward with him as manager. We have to. He's still the manager. And I just think he's well within his rights to want a defensive midfielder or a centre midfielder that's going to walk into that start. It's important that we sign a centre midfielder that starts against Bournemouth. That's what we have to be aiming for. We have to be buying someone that Moyes will play. There's no point buying someone like Carlos Borges that's going to be a centre midfielder. We cannot gamble on the centre midfielder. Has to be for today, not tomorrow, not next season. It has to be someone for today. Could you imagine we signed someone in the ilk of Carlos Borges but centre midfield? You know what that centre midfield will look like against Bournemouth and Chelsea. You know what it'll look like. It'll be Downs and Souček. And I don't want to see Downs and Souček started in the Premier League. I don't want to. It won't be good enough. We have to bring in a player that Moyes will play. Like I said, Borges is different. We can afford to bring in a left winger that will not start against Bournemouth, that will get minutes here and there. We can afford that because we've got Ben Rama, we've got Fornals. But what we can't do is afford to bring in a project in the centre mid. We have to bring in somebody that's ready to rock and roll, but also someone that David Moyes will play. Now, that player doesn't necessarily have to have Premier League experience. As I've said, there's plenty players David Moyes has thrown in from the start that's got none of that. But if Moyes wants Premier League experience for that role, then we have to go get it. But just because somebody might rock up with Premier League experience doesn't mean Tim Steidten is not in agreement with the transfer. He is showing he will shop in England. Now, like I said, these players didn't necessarily have Premier League experience. They perhaps weren't Premier League proven. They tend to have been youngsters that Steidten's seen for whatever reason, maybe at under 21s level, and thought that's a guy that's going to make it. Let's go get him. But Steidten will shop in England if he needs to. As for the rumour, let's go back to rumours that Steidten might walk. Listen, is it possible? Of course it's possible. It's also possible David Moyes might walk. I don't think he will. It's possible that, I don't know, Tom Souček will hand in a transfer request tomorrow. I just don't think he will. I don't see Tim Steidten going anywhere. I'd be shocked. I'd be surprised if Honestly, if he was to walk, I would be gobsmacked. And I just struggle to believe the rumours that's come out, because like I said, somebody close to Steidten that has spoken to Steidten would have had to leak this. And I just struggle to believe it, really. I think, is it frustrating? Of course it is. You know, I want us to bring in new players as much as anyone. But like I said, how you and I, see the transfer window is possibly different to how the clubs see it. And their track record, David Moyes at West Ham, David Moyes away from West Ham, and West Ham before David Moyes. Let's go back to 2015. Transfer deadline day, we brought in 3 players. Mikel Antonio being one. We were bringing in players on deadline day. We do our business late. We always have done. Moyes tends to do his business late. So just because me and you're looking, going, hang on a minute, we've got 2 weeks till the season starts, this isn't good enough. It's possible. It's very possible the club are sitting there going, we've got a month. We've got a month to bring in players. There's loads of time. Just because I don't want to see Souček and Downs doesn't mean David Moyes is against seeing Souček and Downs start against Bournemouth. I'd like to think he doesn't want that, and there's a bit of urgency from the club, but we are putting in bids. We know that's Wilcox has confirmed that they've rejected our bid for Ward-Prowse. That proves there's a bid has gone in, that we have made a formal offer for James Ward-Prowse. So things are happening. But just because it perhaps doesn't necessarily fit what we think is a Tim Steidten ideal player, doesn't mean Tim Steidten's not behind it. We don't know. We won't know. And sure, if we were to bring in Ward-Prowse, it feels like a David Moyes signing. Of course it does. I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, Tim Steidten's probably identified. It probably is a David Moyes one. But I go back to just my own belief at the start of this video, which is conversations would have taken place between Steidten and Sullivan. I would like to think conversations took place between Steidten and Moyes before Steidten signed on the dotted line. I like to think he would have said, I need to speak to the manager before I decide what's going on here. I need to make sure we're on the same wavelength, that we've got the same plan going into the transfer window. I would like to think all that happened. And I have lack of faith in David Sullivan doing that, by the way, absolutely. But Tim Steidten, maybe I'm giving him far too much credit here. But I'd like to think somebody with his stock that high in football at the point of joining West Ham wouldn't have come into this blind, wouldn't have come into this without any reassurances or guarantees that he's in charge to some extent. Maybe he was told, this summer you're going to have to take a back seat. You're going to have to let Moyes dictate this summer, but next summer it's all you. You bring in the manager, you bring in the new gaffer, you dictate who we bring in, you bring in the players next summer. But for now, we're going to be backing our current manager so that he can keep West Ham in the Premier League. Because if you bring in players and Moyes don't play him, and the worst thing happens, which is a relegation, that is the worst thing. You won't have a job in 12 months' time. We won't have a technical director. You'll be gone. So we need to retain our Premier League status minimum. That's the bare minimum for West Ham next season. Survive. That's it. That's the minimum. In order to do that, Moyes needs to have the best chance. We need to give Moyes the best chance to do that. And that's probably letting him bring in his own centre midfielders. Like I said, you don't have to let Moyes pick the exciting young left winger, the exciting young left back. That can be Steidten. But in terms of centre mid, I think it's important that David Moyes brings in who he wants, because he will play him. Again, this doesn't mean I want David Moyes at the club. I've accepted Moyes is here. I don't agree with it, but I've accepted it. It doesn't matter who I want to see bring in. I would love to see Romeo Lavia brought in as the defensive midfielder. But it's not about that. It's about Moyes getting who he wants in order for West Ham to have the best possible season next season. We have seen, the last season that's passed, we have seen what happens when there's a feeling that Moyes has got players thrust upon him. Lucas Paqueta, Gianluca Scamacca. You won't convince me that Moyes rubber stamped those deals. You will not convince me. Just like you won't convince me that David Moyes has rubber stamped Carlos Borges. It does not. I struggle to believe that Moyes is, let's bring in Carlos Borges. I'm going to give him loads of minutes. Bring him in. I struggle to believe that. It feels like something that Rob Newman's done, which is interesting considering he's taken a back seat, but we're going to listen to him on this one. But my point is, just because the profile fits what we think is David Moyes doesn't mean Tim Steidten doesn't agree. We'll never know. Well, we might one day. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there. It's a bit of a ramble, but I just don't believe the rumour that Tim Steidten might walk away, because if he does, then shame on Sullivan. But I'll tell you what, shame on Tim Steidten for coming to a job without reassurances. Maybe, like I said, maybe he's been given them, and since he signed on it, we've retreated on that. Said actually, nah, you're not going to get it. Maybe, but I just find it hard to believe. There's far too many what ifs and buts and maybes in order for that to happen. I just think we're just rubbish at negotiating transfers. Something that happened before Tim Steidten. We were poor at it. I think we're just slow at identifying who we want to bring in. Something that happened before Tim Steidten. And yes, I hope that Tim Steidten would come in and wave a magic wand. West Ham would be good at doing transfer business. Hopefully that will come. But for this summer, it doesn't look like it. But we shall wait and see. We will wait and see. But Tim Steidten does not mind shopping in England. David Moyes does not mind playing players with no Premier League experiences. That's the two things that I wanted to say in this video. And I don't believe the rumour. Anyway, I look forward to reading your comments on this subject. Of course, please do subscribe to Hamish Chat if you haven't already done so. Drop a like on the video if you enjoyed it. I might catch up with you later, actually. I might catch up with you later because James Ward-Prowse, innit? I'll see you then.